All right, let's talk about Trump and Liberation Day. People are freaking out. They can't make sense of him. They keep asking, what the heck is he thinking? Especially with this trade war. Well, we're about to crack open the Trump playbook. But first, let's let the man tee it up himself.
So I was looking through some of your interviews, and I'm finding it hard to settle on a grand narrative for the book. Yes, you like making deals.
Oh, I'm going to stop you right there, Tony. I don't like making deals. Do you understand? I love making deals. I love making deals. The bigger, the better.
But to what end?
To what end? Deals are the end. I mean, that's like asking Da Vinci why he painted the Mona Lisa.
Consider yourself an artist.
Well, I am an artist, Tony, and deals are my art form. Look,
People need to think there's some sort of special sauce, principles, set of rules that make you different.
well, that's easy because I have my rules. I got 3 rules, okay? They're my 3 rules of winning. Rule 1, the world is a mess, okay? The world is a mess, Tony. You have to fight back. You have to have a tough skin. Attack, attack, attack. If somebody comes after you with a knife, you shoot him back with a bazooka, okay? Rule 2, what is truth, Tony? What is truth? You know what's truth? What you say is truth, what I say is truth, what he says is truth. What is the truth in life? Deny everything, admit nothing. You know what's true? What I say is true. And third of all, the most important, no matter how fucked you are, you never, ever, ever admit defeat. You always claim victory. Always.
So this was from the 2024 movie The Apprentice. And I encourage you to watch it all if you can. It's available on Apple and a number of other streaming services. It was quite interesting and reveals a lot about how Trump deals with a lot of different situations. Now let's get down to the kernel of this, is that how does Trump operate? And the truth is basically Trump is actually pretty predictable. Whenever he wants something, he runs the same 3-step process every single time. Step number 1, he causes chaos. So how does he do this? Well, just quite simply, he opens up his mouth, makes a threat, makes bold claims, plays fast and loose with the truth. And the result is a lot of confusion, outrage, media frenzy. The more the merrier. That's how Trump operates. And this shouldn't be a surprise because he's done this over and over and over and over again. And quite frankly, we've all kind of gotten used to it. We had it just happen recently. This was what Liberation Day was all about, to create a media ruckus. He wanted lots of attention. He may not have wanted the markets to have tanked as much as they have, but he wanted the attention. Some other examples are when Trump early on, he said he wanted to take over the Panama Canal. He said he wanted to turn Gaza into a Mediterranean Riviera hotel resort area. And let's just deport all those Palestinians. So these are examples of step number 1, inaction. And we have to take a step back here and to understand, why does this work? And again, I'm going to go back to the movie. You heard it from Trump himself there. The truth is whatever you want it to be. And the psychology research also shows us here that if you push a message long enough, often enough, and you have it echoed by enough other people, many people will come to accept it. And they may not even believe it deep down inside, but they're going to accept it. It's a weird phenomenon. And there's actually been some interesting psychological research and experiments that have been done to put somebody in a room and have everybody in the room tell a lie, and then basically get that person to also say the same thing because they don't want to be the odd person out in a certain way. And it's funny because if you look at Liberation Day announcements and Trump's whole take on tariffs, realistically, until now, nobody really believed that tariffs could work this way. And there's still no serious expertise out there that really believes in this stuff. But now there's actually credence being brought to the whole idea because, well, Trump's doing it and he's having everybody else talk about it. So this is part of that mob mentality chaos that is warping our reality in a sense where it's helping Trump gain leverage. So that is step number 1. All right, step number 2, sit back and look at the chaos happen and wait for offers and opportunities to come to you. Okay, so once he stirred up the storm, he doesn't rush in with a solution. He just waits. And again, you can look at what happened over the weekend after Liberation Day, and the markets tanked for 2 days consecutive. And Trump just went down and played a bunch of golf. He's keeping steady. He does this all the time. Things can be crumbling all around him, and he'll be cool as a cucumber. And that's exactly how he needs to be if he's going to pull this off. Okay, step number 3, pick the best available deal. And here's the key thing to understand about Trump is that he's rarely married to a solution. And he's actually pretty open-minded when it comes down to it. So his only real goal at the end of the day is find a deal that makes him look the best. Really. He cares about his legacy. And when a great deal pops up, you better believe he's going to pounce on it and he's going to take credit for it. But what if no good deal materializes? Well, that's not a problem. He's got two options. Option number one, he just goes back to step one, cause more chaos. And we see that happen time and again. That how many times did he reset tariffs? Now, that being said, if something's hopeless and keep going in that direction is not really going to yield anything, Trump has no problems pivoting at the end of the day. Go back to what he said earlier. What is truth? One of his 3 rules is never admit defeat. He can repivot and call it a victory and move on. So that's important to keep in mind on here. And one example of this is the Panama Canal situation. Trump came out quite forcefully in the opening days of his term and says, we got to take over the Panama Canal. Understand that the United States, up until the Carter administration, they built and also operated and owned the canal, versus President Carter basically gave the canal to the Panama government. So Trump was actually very clear in his language where he says, we've got to take over the Panama Canal, meaning the U.S. government would have to take over administration of the Panama Canal. And the reasons were quite legitimate because China owns key ports on either side of the canal. So quite practically speaking, they could clog up the canal if there was some form of a war that broke out or some form of a conflict that would broke out, and China wanted to either block trade or even worse, block U.S. warships from quickly going between the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean or vice versa. So that was actually an important national security concern. So what ended up happening, as we are today, early April 2025, the United States government has not taken over administration of the Panama Canal. However, magically enough, BlackRock, a U.S. company, has purchased those key ports from the Chinese. And that deal was brokered between the Panamanian government. And all of a sudden, Trump is happy. So again, he's not exactly married to a solution. And we have to keep an eye out and be creative in terms of what he could possibly want in the future. So let's zoom out here for a moment. Trump's boldest move so far, tariffs and the so-called Liberation Day. Now, should we be surprised? Not really. He's been telling us that he's going to be doing this for a long time. But here's the real question. Is Trump married to tariffs as a long-term strategy? And if you listen closely to what he said about tariffs comprehensively over the last year at least, it's actually not hard to read at all. He is a terrible actor, really. He flip-flops openly when he's riffing with the media, so you get an idea of what he's really thinking underneath the hood. Sometimes he'll say tariffs are forever, and sometimes he'll say, oh, tariffs are a short-term thing. They give us a good deal. We'll reduce or we'll whatever. So he has flip-flopped openly about this in the media a number of times. So what is he really married to? Well, go back to what he said at the beginning. He's married to making a deal. He loves making a deal. Everything about Trump is making a deal. And tariffs are his go-to leverage. The way he set things up here, he doesn't need to bother with Congress or the Senate to enact them. He just puts them in place and he can do that pretty much at his will. So where are we now? He's played his first hand, imposing the tariffs. That's step number one. And just like in the movie where he says, what is truth? We've learned that the data behind these tariffs is a sham. Honestly, just a bunch of nonsense. When he says that a country has a certain percentage of tariffs and other non-tariff trade barriers, all he did was basically take the trade deficit divided by the amount of exports, and basically that's how the percentage was calculated, which has nothing to do with any trade barrier and only has something to do with the fact that the United States is a huge, rich country that buys a lot of stuff from everybody. So that's the idiotic approach as to how he's made these pronouncements. But again, it doesn't matter. He's got the power to do it, and whether he does it based on reality doesn't matter. He just needs to create a ruckus. That's his step one, create chaos. Now we're in step two, and the ball is in everyone else's court. And because he's tariffed everybody, I'm going to just divide this up into 4 categories so that we can break down how the world is going to react and deal with this situation. So, number one, we've got countries that don't matter. I mean, this is like the penguins of the herd in McDonald Island, right? But there's a lot of other countries out there. They're very, very poor. They do a little bit of trade with the United States. And honestly, the volumes mean nothing at the end of the day. We're talking about that it's probably going to cost the administration more money to administer all this stuff for all these small countries where there's only like a few $1 million worth of trade happening, then it would have just been, it would have been better off just leaving them alone. So it doesn't matter. I know it's going to suck for many of those countries. I really feel bad. But the reality is in the global economy and the U.S. economy's perspective, this is a drop in the bucket. It doesn't really matter. So category number 2 here, we're going to be dealing with poorer countries that do a significant amount of trade with the United States. And one interesting example here is Vietnam. So Vietnam's been slapped a very significant tariff rate, and they have already contacted the United States to start negotiations. What a lot of people don't understand about Vietnam was that back as the pandemic was ramping up and China becoming a problem supply chain wise, the US administration, a lot of US companies went to Vietnam and basically invested to establish very rudimentary manufacturing capabilities there, so the United States could diversify away from China. And now Vietnam is like, what, you guys wanted us to help you, we helped, we're poor as shit, and you now want to tariff everything? This is the bizarro situation that it seemed the Trump administration were completely oblivious to. Because Vietnam is a very poor country. There is also a large amount of hatred in Vietnam for China, because China tried to invade Vietnam, and the Vietnamese aren't very fond of the Chinese. If you wanted to partner with somebody to take manufacturing capability away from China, especially the low value stuff, Vietnam was the perfect partner for this. And now they're being made an enemy. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this plays out. But for the most part, if you look at countries in these categories, they don't have a lot of leverage, meaning that basically at the end of the day, they need to come up with a deal with the United States quickly in order to protect their own economies, which are very, very fragile, and they really can't fight back with anything. The interesting thing that's going to be happening to watch at a deeper level is for some of these nations, they may quietly be pivoting towards China as a more reliable partner than the United States. And even for a country like Vietnam, where there is vehement hatred for China, this may actually where they will collaborate more with China and have a closer relationship with China. And this is a very potentially dangerous thing to be happening over the long term here. All right, so that's category number 2. Category number 3 here is basically what I like to call belligerents and oddball. And these are, as you would expect, China, Russia, Iran, those kind of countries. Now, in terms of Iran and Russia, there's not a lot of economic ties to the United States. They may get something out of Russia in terms of some sort of a deal for somehow solving the Ukraine conflict. With China, this is the bigger issue. And let's be honest, this is the one relationship where things really matter to the United States. And where the United States have the bigger bone to pick is with China. And this is where it's going to get real messy. Now, Jinping obviously wants to build up this image as China being the great empire. They are now the great superpower. And if you just take a casual look at China and you look underneath the hood, China is sitting on a crumbling foundation of disastrous demographics and really shaky fiscal and economic positions regarding how so out-leveraged, they have so much debt, and basically the way the economy is configured there is pointing towards a Chinese collapse probably within the next 10 to 15 years. So China has fired back with reciprocal tariffs, and we may see this reciprocal tariffs going back and forth. But the important thing to understand here is two things, because China doesn't only have the reciprocal tariffs they can respond with. They also have two other big cards that they are playing as well. Number one, we have to remember that China is also the number one producer when it comes to copper, steel, aluminum. They produce over half of those materials throughout the world. So these are the common materials that are needed to build manufacturing capability, to do construction, to build large things. And so we still rely on China quite a bit for those products. They control 90% of the graphite production across the world. So again, they have significant leverage when it comes to those products, which if you want to reestablish the manufacturing base, if you want to build factories, if you want to turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower, you need those products. And you can't just, at a flip of the switch, have that production capacity come into the United States. It's going to take time. There's nothing really super complicated about creating those factories. These are technologies that have existed for decades, but it will take 3, 4, 5, 10 years to get to that production capacity. Where the real problem lies is in the rare earth minerals. There are a whole set of rare earth minerals, and I won't get into the details here, where China is the exclusive producer. So these rare earth minerals are needed for large-scale batteries. They're needed for electronics. They're needed for military equipment. And what the Chinese have actually done on these rare earth minerals is that they have instituted basically a permitting system, which is essentially going to block any US companies from purchasing those rare earth minerals, which is going to really hamper down a lot of interesting key industries in the United States that exist today. So there is a huge cart in front of the horse situation that's happened here. Because yes, China is the number one problem that we need to deal with, both economically and militarily. And the key initially in a smart strategy to doing that was use China as a bridge while you build up that manufacturing capability. Having the United States take over and do more and more and more manufacturing has always been the plan. The United States has lost faith in China as a trading partner. So this was always the plan. But the plan was, let's do this quietly rather than blow everything up and then have China block your efforts of being able to do this. So we'll see, because basically now Trump and Xi Jinping are tied in a very high stakes game of economic chicken here. So buckle up. It's going to be interesting. The fourth category, and also really important category, is basically the developed world countries. And these countries would be allies in some way, shape, or form with the United States. We're talking about NATO countries, South Korea, Japan, etc. So these are America's quote-unquote friends. And the ones that Trump claims are ripping the United States off. And this is just about tariffs anymore. This is about rewriting the rules for all these relationships. So what does Trump want from these countries? If there are some trade barriers, and in some countries there are, he wants those trade barriers to come out. Again, Trump's funky formula of trade deficit divided by exports, just the only problem that these countries have is they just have smaller populations. So they just don't buy as much stuff as the huge population of the United States buys from them. Again, this is ludicrous. This isn't sound policy. But Trump, deep down inside, he knows that, and he just doesn't care. He wants to make a deal. There's other things that he would like to get out of these countries as well here. So this is important to know. One important thing is that the United States is looking for is to weaken the American dollar. Now you may be wondering, why would we want to weaken the American dollar? Well, one of the big trade barriers the United States has for itself, the simple value of its own currency. The US dollar is valued so high that it's a trade barrier, because when you're trying to sell things to other countries, the currency exchange does kill a lot of exports. And you may be thinking, Derek, that sounds kind of weird. Well, if you're a Canadian and you're paying attention to the news between 2007 and 2013, you'll remember those years where basically the Canadian dollar was actually worth more than the American dollar. A Canadian dollar could buy $1.05 US, or buy $1.10 US up to a certain point. And what happened in the news here was we were hearing a lot of companies in Ontario particularly that were trying to export to the United States, and they were struggling because of the high currency exchange. We export to the United States very well because the Canadian dollar is worth so low. So the United States is kind of looking at this, we should do this. And you may be thinking, well, that sounds weird. How could the United States do this? Well, actually, they've done it before. Go back to 1985, we got the Plaza Accords, where basically the United States with Japan, France, Germany, UK basically signed an agreement, because what was happening up until 1985 was that the US currency flared up in value quite a bit, and that was killing US exports everywhere. So the United States and these other countries basically made arrangements to devalue the dollar. I won't get into the details here, but essentially the US currency was manipulated to a point where the US dollar would normalize down to where it was before it peaked, okay? So that was a concerted effort. It worked. But it just really brought back the US dollar to where it was before. What Trump is looking for now is much more substantial, and he's looking to bring the US dollar even lower. This is a very complicated thing. This has been talked about as the Mar-a-Lago Accords, and this is a much more significant undertaking than what was done back in 1985. So in order to pull this off, it's going to require a whole bunch more countries. It's going to require those countries to commit more heavily to the plan that the Trump administration is hacking in the background here. And not only to achieve this, but also to sustain it. Because remember, 1985, the Plaza Accord, really all it did was it just fixed a temporary issue with the US kind of flaring up in high dollar value. This is looking at resetting things and bringing the value of the dollar much lower. So that's the important thing that the Trump administration is looking for. And these developed countries all have capabilities where they can play a part in that piece. Next, Trump would like to renegotiate the U.S. national debt. This is a big problem for the United States, that they're running a high debt. The servicing of that debt is extremely taxing. I'm glad that somebody's actually looking at this. And believe it or not, that if the dollar is reduced in value and if interest rates come lower, this will go a long way to help strategize how the United States will deal with its ballooning debt. And these are very, very big asks that the Trump administration is going for with these countries. And you better believe that at the end of the day, one of the key things that's going to be put at stake for these countries will be security guarantees. And even NATO itself may be a negotiating chip. Because Trump has said a number of times that we're not here to protect the world. We don't care about NATO anymore. Well, guess what? That was really just creation of leverage. because Trump needs a huge ask from each one of these countries if he wants them to collaborate here. So that is an important point that's put on the docket here. And last but not least, what the Trump administration wants from these countries, because they're more rich. Hey, why don't you guys buy more American stuff? Okay, so that's basically what we can see unfold here. And particularly if you look at that category 4, that is going to take some time. So the real question will be is how desperate will Trump get as time goes by? Truth of the matter is, no matter what's happening around him, he'll stay cool as a cucumber. So I'm not expecting him to crumble. Maybe some people around him will panic. If he is successful there and tariffs are simply used as a tool to negotiate, that is actually going to be a major victory for the United States. But again, he has put a huge amount of political capital on the line here. Basically, he manufactured a crisis with imaginary numbers and said, you guys come over here and start negotiating. And he's got very high expectations, particularly for that category 4 set of nations to achieve. So this is going to be important to see how this plays out. Now, you may be thinking, will this all play out the way he wants them to play out? Either the tariffs aren't working, they're causing inflation, or whatever the case may be. And this is where I just respond and say, it's Trump. Remember that Trump, ultimately, apart from making a deal, cares the most about his legacy. He wants to be remembered as the greatest president of all time, maybe even more famous than George Washington. So, like Trump said in his movie, he'll pivot. If push comes to shove down the road, he will pivot. He'll reframe the argument, and he will never admit defeat, and he will look to claim victory just in a different way. So, this will play out. We don't exactly know how much time it's going to take to play out, but it's going to play out. And the bottom line is that the only question will be is how much collateral damage is done to the supply chain and basically to inflation. So on the inflation side, it's reasonable to expect that inflation will go up by 0.5% or 1% more. Will it go out of control? That is a really complicated question to answer. I don't know. But most experts seem to be thinking that's the way inflation is going to go. With regards to critical supply chains, especially in the short term, it's all going to depend on how these negotiations happen and roll out. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, I want to know from you, what are your comments? What do you think is going to happen here, right? Do you agree with me mostly? Do you disagree? Do you think I've been knocked off my rocker? I don't care about the likes and the subscribes, whatever, that's nice. But I want to hear what you think. Put what you think in the comments below. Looking forward to the conversation.